At night, the banks of the Ohio River roared with water, and a nearby log cabin, a Native American mother waiting for her baby to arrive. It was the year 1768, and the stars were twinkling in the clear sky. When this mother gave birth to her child at some time of the night, her eyes were on the sky. The mother saw a star break from the sky and disappear somewhere behind the distant Apocalypse Mountains. In her Shawnee tribe, the falling star was called Tecumseh. This scene was so fascinating that the mother also named the child Tecumseh. This was the child who had to fight for an independent country for his people. If Canada is not a part of America today, this child has a very important role in it. What is the story of this baby and the new country of the United States of America? What was the battle wherein the American flag was bombed all night, but did not fall? But why? Why was America to fight another war for independence? I am Faisal Warh, and in this episode of Deco Sano Jano's History of America, I will show you all of this. America comprised the mapped 13 states when it gained independence in 1776. Then, by 1783, this area, which extends to the present-day U.S. state of Wisconsin, was also included in the United States. But between these early 13 states and the vast America that spread westward was the Apocalypse Mountains, a range thousands of kilometers long. At that time, this area was called Northwest. Today it is called the Old Northwest. These magical landscapes and eye-popping lakes that you see are part of the same Northwest. So this region and the new country USA was separated by this mountain range. Accessing the Northwest from these 13 states was not easy. Only a small number of Americans made it through the difficult mountain passes. But then the Americans soon found a place far down in the south that could easily reach the Northwest bypassing the Appalachian Mountains. As you can see on the map, this route passed through the present-day American coastal city of New Orleans. American or white settlers would go to New Orleans and from here, travel up the Mississippi River, would easily reach upper Northwest or around. For this reason, the number of Americans in the Northwest began to increase rapidly. But to all the Americans who were settling here in the Northwest, for them the maritime trade for other significant purposes. These 13 states across the Appalachian Mountains were of great importance. Rather, these states were also their main supply line. That's why the importance of the area of New Orleans connecting these two parts can be well understood. But the problem was that the Americans were using this route. But this area was not part of the United States until 1803. The area was under French control, and France was ruled by a powerful commander like Napoleon Bonaparte. It was feared if this area of strategic importance was closed off by Napoleon, a vital supply line between the two sides of America would be cut off. So, to save it, the Americans made a historic deal with France. This deal was the largest in US history in terms of areas which it had without a war. In 1803, the US bought from France the Northwest area, including New Orleans, which is historically called Louisiana Territory. And do you know how much it was bought for? For only $11.2 million. For 2.1 million square kilometers for only $11.2 million. The annexation of this territory to the US yielded two benefits to America. On the one hand, the area of this new country has doubled, and on the other, supply line to America from the Northwest was secured. Now, with New Orleans joining the United States, American settlers began to reach the Northwest easily through New Orleans. But here already lived Native American tribes, indigenous peoples who numbered in the millions. And they lived here for thousands of years, and this land was their home. Keep in mind that when France, Great Britain or America would take any land from each other, the natives or the local tribes had no role in it. The USA, British or French, which took over the land, were to deal with these tribes. It was up to them to let them stay there or not, or expel or kill them or enslave them. So the Americans did the same in the Northwest. What they did elsewhere by dint of their cleverness or force of arms. That is, they began to take away lands from the natives cleverly and evict them. Even in 1809, the 12,000 square kilometers area was taken away from the natives by the Americans under the Fort Wayne Treaty. The area was below Lake Michigan, where now are Illinois and Indiana. Fort Wayne was the treaty that convinced the tribal youth that they were now enslaved by the white settlers. This sense of enslavement gave rise to a rage, and the rage was inflamed when the hero of the natives, Tecumseh, led it. Tecumseh was a chief of the Shawnee tribe of the Northwest. His tribe settled in what are now the U.S. states of Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. Tecumseh strongly opposed the Fort Wayne Treaty. The governor of Indiana, William Harrison, met Tecumseh a couple of times in a bid to convince him not to oppose the treaty, because the lands it covered were outside of his Shawnee tribe, and that those native tribes were mostly in favor of a treaty with the Americans. Despite these arguments, Tecumseh did not agree. Rather, according to legend, he once during the talks with William Harrison, he took out and raised his axe in anger, at which William also took out his sword. However, there was no fight and the matter was sorted out amicably. It was true the Shawnee tribe of Tecumseh was not involved in the Fort Wayne Treaty, but Tecumseh considered all the local tribes as one nation. He believed that the whites would gradually deal with all the native tribes separately and would eventually take over all their land one day, as it was happening. Therefore, he united all tribes in the Northwest and was struggling for a homeland for the native people. He wanted to create an independent country for the natives in the Northwest, now known as the Great Lakes area. This part falls between Canada and the United States. In his struggle, Tecumseh was joined by his brother, a religious leader of the tribe. His brother Lalawethika called himself the prophet. He had frequent fits and would become drowsy or sometimes collapse sitting. On getting up, he would say the Holy Spirits ruling the world had sent him a message. He once said that the spirits had asked him that white Americans were the scourge of nature on the natives, because the natives have left their culture and adopted the ways of the white people, and the spirits do not like this at all. He would also give a message from the spirits that, if the natives unite, the whites will be wiped out from the Northwest, and then the native tribes will be able to live freely on their land in their own way. Under this campaign, he was uniting all the tribes of the Northwest. Tecumseh and his brother Lalawethika lived in Prophet's Town, the headquarters of the Shawnee tribe, which got its name from Lalawethika's claim to prophethood against the Americans. These two brothers and this tribe got full support from Britain. You may ask that Britain had given up its hold on America years ago. Britain was still maintaining its pressure on America as a superpower. This pressure was from both the east and the west of America. In the east, where the Atlantic Ocean is, the British warships used to attack American merchant ships and rob and kidnap their crews. Britain would force America to completely stop trade with its enemy countries like France, etc. When America refused to accept British dictation, British fleets would blockade maritime routes for America. All this was done by Britain in the Atlantic Ocean, to the east of the 13 colonies, while to the west of these colonies, across the Apocalypse Mountains, Great Britain was also continuously interfering. Britain was arming the native tribes so that they could continue to fight the American forces, and the US at no point could not invade Canada, which was then under British control. That is why Britain armed them in Tecumseh's mission for independence. In return, Tecumseh's forces helped British forces against the US to save Canada. Thus, Britain had gripped the US from the sea in the east and the northwest region. In the west, that is, from both sides, 13 colonies of America did not feel free due to pressure and interference of Britain. Many in America believed that if they wanted true independence from Britain, they would have to fight another decisive war with Britain. Then, unexpectedly, this Second War of American Independence started early, and one of the immediate reasons for this was the same broken star, Tecumseh. For the sake of ousting Americans from his territory, was preparing for a decisive war with the help of Britain. Then the Americans made a surprise attack, and in 1811 the war began. The American intellectuals had been expecting over the long time, and this war is called America's Second War of Independence. Governor William Harrison of Indiana, who later became the American president, marched on Tecumseh's headquarters at Prophetstown with 1,100 soldiers. Tecumseh was not there at that time. His younger brother Lalawithika fought the Americans with 600 warriors but was defeated and escaped to Canada, where his ally the British ruled. William's army set fire to Prophetstown after looting it. During the looting and search, a bombshell of a vital secret fell on the Americans. So when the Americans searched Prophetstown, they found many British weapons. That is, now the evidence was found that Britain is fully supporting the native tribes against the United States. This news spread like wildfire. The American press created an uproar that Britain should be retaliated. Many hardliners in America were already talking about war with Britain. This incident gave more strength to his position. The next year, in 1812, the American Congress declared war against Britain. The most important target of the United States in this war was not to defeat Tecumseh, but its target was to capture the territory of Canada to defeat Britain decisively, because Canada was a British colony at that time. This move of the Americans was very powerful and timely, as the British army was then at war with the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Therefore, the British army could not pay much attention to the Canadian front. With this weak moment in mind, the Americans repeatedly launched attacks on British forces in Canada, but surprisingly the lesser British army pushed the Americans back every time. With the British forces, Tecumseh's forces were also involved in rescuing Canada, because after the destruction of his capital Prophetstown, he publicly joined hands with the British and also declared war against America against its new colonies. Tecumseh, along with the British, defeated the American forces on several fronts and captured one of their key territories, Detroit. Tecumseh was a headache for the Americans on several fronts. Americans were quite upset by his attacks and his heroic personality. He had become a role model of bravery and independence for the native youth. Stories of his bravery and kindness were widely exaggerated among the tribes. Now America wanted to eliminate Tecumseh, a symbolic leader, at every cost, but many times he escaped even after being hit by their bullets. In 1813, Tecumseh was in a fort near Detroit in the area held by the Americans. Here he learned his old enemy, William Harrison, who set fire to Prophetstown, was approaching with an army of 3,500 men. Tecumseh had 600-700 native fighters and an equal number of Britishers to fight. It was an army of a total of 1,300-1,400 men, which was less than half of the army of the US commander William Harrison. In this condition, it was impossible to fight the Americans. Therefore, the British army and their native allies, the soldiers of Tecumseh, evacuated Detroit and its nearby forts and retreated towards Canada to the banks of the Thames River. But William Harrison was a shrewd commander. He wanted to end the threat forever. He did not give up the pursuit of Tecumseh and the British soldiers. Pursuing them, in a few days he reached the banks of the Thames, where Tecumseh and his English allies were encamped. When Tecumseh and the British saw no other option, they set out to fight. On October 5, 1813, the two armies clashed near the River Thames. The British were beaten and fled after a strong attack from the Americans. But Tecumseh and his warriors, knowing that it was a losing battle, continued to fight resolutely against the Americans. They did not accept surrender, not to let his generations face the shame of it. Tecumseh was also a poet. He said in his revolutionary poems, "I sing the song of my death and die like a hero returning home." So in this battle, a single bullet showed this hero the way home. The tomahawk, a symbol of the resistance of the native tribes, was in his hand. When the bullet sang his death and a dreamer for having land for his people, here the struggle for a separate homeland was gone. After the battle, native fighters buried Tecumseh somewhere on the riverbank. The Battle of the River Thames was a decisive battle in American history. America had now won it. With Tecumseh's death, the resistance of natives in the Northwest ended forever. No one was there to challenge the United States. British forces made a massive symbolic attack on the Americans the next year. They captured the White House. In mid-1814, a British fleet was on its way to attack the US coastal city of Baltimore. Baltimore was the port from where the US ships used to attack British ships. This fleet, for unknown reasons, changed its course and attacked Washington. British Marine forces landed in Maryland and began advancing toward Washington. The American soldiers tried hard to stop them, resisted them, but the British Army continuously pushed them back and reached the capital, Washington, D.C. on August 23rd. A day before the British Army arrived in the capital, American President James Madison went outside Washington to assess the situation on the battlefield, but he did not get the chance to return. And after receiving the news of the British advance, he saw fit to flee to Virginia in the chaos. Now in the White House, then called the Executive Mansion, his wife Dolly Madison was waiting for him. During this wait, Dolly would often stand in a window of the White House and look out over the city through binoculars. She did not see her husband, but she saw a group of British soldiers at some distance from the city. Dolly realized the danger and immediately ordered his servants to pack up the official files in the White House and leave the city with her. But along with this command, she also gave another strange command. She said the portrait of George Washington, installed in the White House, should be taken down and hidden in a safe place. Dolly Madison did not want the portrait of the hero of the U.S. War of Independence, George Washington, should go to the British Army for bad treatment. So, on her orders, the painting of George Washington was taken out of the frame and hidden in an outside farmhouse where painting remained safe for weeks. It was returned to the White House when the situation improved. George Washington's painting is installed in the East Room of the White House. It goes at it the same painting that Dolly Madison saved at that time. After saving this portrait, Dolly also left the city with his servants and reached her husband in Virginia when the British Army entered Washington on August 24 after the escape of Dolly. The city was deserted. All citizens and the American soldiers had left the city the day before. British troops entered Washington and attacked the U.S. Capitol, the place where the U.S. government offices are located. In those days, the U.S. Capitol was still under construction and not completed. The British set this unfinished U.S. Capitol on fire. British soldiers then entered the White House, where they ate from the U.S. president's dishes and looted the entire building. British Commander Admiral Cockburn took the U.S. president's hat and a chair cushion of the First Lady as souvenirs. The British soldiers opened the White House windows and gathered on the lawn. They lit torches and threw them in through the open windows of the White House. The White House burned and black smoke rose towards the sky with the flames. It is said that the flames of the fire in the White House were visible from miles away. By burning official buildings in Washington, D.C., the British actually took revenge on the Americans because they had also burned York, now Toronto, the capital of Upper Canada, a year earlier. So, as Toronto and the capital of Tecumseh, Prophetstown, were burned, the same story was repeated by nature with the American capital as well. After Washington, the British Legion had the most important battle in U.S. history. That gave birth to the American national anthem. How was that war? After burning the government buildings in Washington, D.C., the British Army evacuated the city, boarded their ships, and headed for their original target, Baltimore. Here a bigger challenge awaited them. Occupying Baltimore was not as simple as burning the White House. This was due to the fact the city was at a great depth far back from the coast, and the coastal land extended far on either side of it. The city could be attacked from two places only, one from the port side facing the front, and the other from the land route that bypassed the port to the city. The Americans had made full arrangements to secure these two routes. The passage to the port was also very narrow. At the edge of this narrow passage, the Americans had built a big fort called Fort McHenry, and cannons were installed on it in order to secure the land route after the port. The American soldiers and the people had made fronts by collecting mud and artillery behind them. So these days, both land and sea routes were fully secured by the Americans. When the British fleet reached Baltimore, the British commanders, instead of attacking by sea, decided to proceed by land. The bid failed badly as British Commander General Ross was killed therein. The command of the British Army came to Commander Colonel Arthur Brooke, but the war could not proceed from here. On the land front, there was a stalemate. The British fleet then advanced and began shelling Fort McHenry, which was guarding the harbor. If this fort was conquered, the British Army could easily enter the harbor and capture Baltimore, its goal. The night of September 13 and 14 passed as a doomsday at Fort McHenry. Hundreds of shells from the British fleet fell around the fort and into the sea. Their blasting presented the scene of a firework in the sky. Amid the fireworks, the star-spangled American flag was flying over the fort. Francis Scott Key, a Maryland lawyer, watched the scene from a ship near shore. He took out a pen and paper and wrote an American song, later known as the Star-Spangled Banner. That is a flag adorned with stars. No bomb could drop this flag that flew till morning when the bombardment ended. On the morning of September 14, the British had lost the spirit. Despite such a heavy bombardment, they failed to capture Fort McHenry. They recalled all troops and left Baltimore. The retreat of the British fleet from Baltimore was a grand victory for the USA. This victory made the poem Star-Spangled Banner so popular that in 1931 this poem became the American national anthem. Although the United States was victorious in Baltimore, but in the two-year war from 1812 to 1814, both the gain from both Britain and the United States was nothing. Britain had successfully defended Canada, and America had saved its important territories from the British. The British captured many areas of the US state of Maine on the Canadian border. However, these areas did not have significant strategic importance. So now both countries decided to end this futile war. On December 24, 1814, a peace treaty was signed in Ghent, Belgium. It was agreed the countries would return areas taken away from each other. America did not get any new land from this war, but it definitely got the benefit of complete freedom from British pressure. Britain stopped attacks on US merchant ships and ended military aid to native tribes in the Northwest. That is why Americans remember this war as their second war of independence. Great Britain stopped interfering in America, but nothing was done to protect the native tribes in the peace treaty. They were left at the mercy of the conquering Americans. Then it happened that in 1830, US President Andrew Jackson, for removing the native tribes from their lands, passed the law called the Indian Removal Act. This act removed thousands of Native Americans from their homelands and sent to Indian reservations hundreds of kilometers away. During this journey, many people died of hunger and disease. This journey is now called the Trail of Tears or the Highway of Tears. The descendants of survived are still living in the same Indian reservations. These people today call America the stolen country because America is established today on the lands taken from their forefathers. When this Second American War of Independence ended in 1814, the U.S. had spread from the state of Louisiana in the south to Montana in the north. After that, Texas to California and Alaska, and the area up to Hawaii. How they all became part of the United States. All of this will be shown in the next episode of History of America Season 2.